Good day, mates. Ever heard of a country going to war with its own wildlife? Sounds like something straight out of a really weird cartoon, right? Well, buckle up, buttercups, because today we're diving into one of the most hilariously bizarre true stories in Australian history. The Great Emu War.
Hello, Curious Clan. Welcome, or welcome back. Let's get in.
Yes, you heard that right. Not a war about emus, but a war against them. In late 1932, in the sun-baked wilds of Western Australia, a nation, with all its military might, decided to take on a feathered foe. And let me tell you, it did not go as planned. This wasn't just some local skirmish. It was a full-blown media circus that turned a nuisance into a national joke. The emu wore a name dreamt up by some very clever, or perhaps very bored. Journalists quickly became synonymous with Australia's feathered folly. Now, how on earth did we get here? Were the emus holding secret meetings, plotting their feathered rebellion? Not quite! The seeds of this bizarre conflict were sown in a perfect storm of post-World War I policies, global economic meltdown, and, well, a whole lot of very thirsty emus. After the Great War, the Aussie government, in a noble but perhaps slightly misguided gesture, promised land to our returning heroes, our diggers, to help them get back on their feet. Sounds great, right? Except a lot of this land was in Western Australia, marginal, drought-prone, and frankly, not exactly prime real estate for a budding farmer. It was like giving someone a yacht in the middle of a desert and telling them to go fishing. By 1932, a quarter of these brave ex-soldiers had already thrown in the towel. Ouch! And just when you thought things couldn't get worse, along came the Great Depression. Wheat prices plummeted faster than a koala after too much eucalyptus, and unemployment soared higher than an emu trying to escape a particularly enthusiastic tourist. These farmers, who'd been told to grow, suddenly found their promised subsidies had vanished like a politician's conscience after an election. Enter our unlikely villains. A massive drought was sweeping through the land, forcing an estimated 20,000 emus, yes, 20,000, to migrate. And where did they find a delicious, all-you-can-eat buffet? On those newly cultivated farmlands in places like the Campion district. It was like they'd won the lottery. If the lottery involved endless wheat fields and fresh water, they weren't just nibbling. They were having a feast. Reports say they were destroying 100 plants for every one they ate. Not to mention smashing through fences and inviting all their rabbit friends to the party. It was an agricultural apocalypse! Feathered edition! So, what's a desperate farmer, especially one who's seen actual combat, going to do? Beg the government for help, of course. And what was their specific, perfectly rational request? Machine guns! Because when your crops are being eaten by oversized, prehistoric-looking birds, a good, old-fashioned Lewis automatic machine gun is clearly the answer. Obviously, this whole situation just screams unintended consequences. You put vulnerable farmers on dodgy land, then a global economic crisis hits, and then a drought drives a feathered army to their doorstep. It highlights how much our human plans can go sideways when we forget about things like, ecology and common sense. Oh, and here's a fun little pre-war tidbit. The emu, once a respected native species, was reclassified as vermin in 1922. Because nothing says we're about to declare war on you like calling you a pest. And the Minister of Defense, a certain Sir George Pierce, thought this whole thing would be good target practice for the military and make it look like they were helping the farmers. So, not just pest control, folks, but also a bit of a political photo op. Because what says strong leadership more than a machine gun pointed at a bird? So, the stage was set. The government, in its infinite wisdom, deployed the Royal Australian Artillery. Leading this epic charge was Major Gwyndy Purves Meredith. Try saying that 5 times fast. after a few too many beers, along with Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran. Their arsenal: 2 glorious Lewis automatic machine guns and a whopping 10,000 rounds of ammunition. That's enough firepower to take on, well, almost anything but a mob of determined emus, it turns out. And just in case anyone thought this wasn't a big deal, a cinematographer was even brought along, probably to capture the glorious victory for the history books. Look, kids, this is how we defeat nature, they probably thought. Confidence was sky high. These are flightless birds, they probably scoffed. This will be a walk in the park, more like a frantic sprint through a very dusty, very confusing park. The first engagement on November 2nd, 1932 involved a flock of about 50 emus. The farmers tried to herd them into an ambush, like cowboys with feathers. But the emus, they scattered like teenagers told to clean their rooms, in every single direction. Despite the initial fusillades, reports were, shall we say, underwhelming. A number killed, perhaps a dozen. Not exactly a glorious tally for a machine gun. A few days later, Major Meredith tried a more strategic approach. He spotted over 1,000 emus heading for a perfect ambush spot, right? They waited, guns poised, heartbeats thumping. They opened fire. Result: 12 birds. And then, because the universe has a wicked sense of humor, one of the machine guns jammed. The rest of the emus, presumably stifling giggles, just dispersed. The early days were a masterclass in inefficiency. After 3 days, only about 30 emus were down. By November 8th, roughly 200 birds accounted for, after firing 2,500 rounds of ammunition. That's like 12.5 rounds per bird. Not exactly bang for your buck, is it? This whole thing just screams military doctrine meets bewildered bird. They were trying to fight a war against birds like it was against another army. Flanking maneuvers, formation tactics against creatures that literally just scatter. It was a fundamental mismatch. The military thought they could apply human warfare strategies to birds. The emu's response? Nope. We're just gonna run in random directions and make you look silly. And that, my friends, is how you set the stage for epic failure. Now, the military quickly learned that these weren't just any birds. These were emu ninjas. They were faster, smarter, and way more resilient than anyone anticipated. These magnificent birds could absorb multiple bullets and just keep on running. It was like they had built-in deflector shields. Imagine trying to hit a moving target that looks like a furry, feathered tank and then just keeps going. Is that all you got? Their speed! Over 30 miles per hour! They could outrun anything the soldiers threw at them, literally. The soldiers were stuck in their heavy vehicles, trying to aim machine guns from bouncing trucks on rough terrain. It was like trying to thread a needle while riding a roller coaster. Totally ineffective! But here's the truly mind-boggling part. The emus seemed to be using guerrilla tactics. They learned to avoid open areas, moving in smaller, more dispersed groups. This made it impossible for the machine guns to get a good spread of casualties. One frustrated soldier even claimed, and I quote, "They seemed to know exactly when and where we were going to be." Ornithologists noted they seemed to anticipate the military's moves. Are we talking bird brains or bird geniuses here? Major Meredith himself, the man in charge of this feathered fiasco, had to admit defeat. He famously stated, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. And their toughness, he called them invulnerable as tanks." So, a military major with machine guns is effectively saying these birds are tougher than tanks. Let that sink in. The real reason for the military's spectacular failure wasn't a lack of effort, but a fundamental misunderstanding of their adversary. Emus have inherent biological traits: speed, resilience, and rapid adaptive behavior that rendered the machine guns useless. Machine guns are for stationary, predictable targets. Emus are the exact opposite. They scattered, they absorbed, they ran. This wasn't a conscious tactics from the emus. It was just their natural survival instincts kicking into overdrive under pressure. And that, my friends, is precisely how Australia lost a war to birds. Nature won! Human intervention! 0! Unsurprisingly, news of the military's utter failure spread faster than a bushfire in a dry summer. By November 8th, the whole world was laughing. Members of the Australian House of Representatives were cracking jokes, saying if anyone deserved medals, it was the emu because they'd won every round so far. Ouch. Public ridicule and negative media coverage quickly forced Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce, to withdraw the troops and guns. But wait, the emus, clearly emboldened by their victory, continued their crop-munching rampage. The farmers, desperate once more, renewed their pleas. Premier James Mitchell of Western Australia, probably sighing heavily, pushed for the military to come back. A highly dubious report, claiming 300 emus were killed in the initial operation, probably more like 30, but who's counting, was used to justify redeploying the machine gunners on November 12th. Because apparently, a highly questionable success is better than admitting total defeat. So, round 2 began, with Major Meredith back at the helm, probably thinking, here we go again. This second phase did see a degree of success, with about 100 emus killed per week by early December. Still, against a population of thousands, it was barely a dent. Meredith was finally recalled on December 10th, officially ending the military campaign. He claimed 986 confirmed kills with 9,860 rounds of ammunition, a neat 10 rounds per kill. He also estimated another 2,500 wounded birds died later. Historians, however, tend to look at those numbers with the same skepticism you'd give a politician promising tax cuts. Highly inflated, regardless of the official numbers. The public perception was crystal clear. The military had failed, and the emus were the undisputed champions. The media had a field day, and the Emu War became a bizarre, hilarious, and ultimately unsuccessful footnote in military history. The rapid withdrawal on November 8th, that was pure damage control. When your war against birds becomes a global punchline, you pull out the troops, no matter how many emus are still strutting around. So, if machine guns didn't work, what did the emus eventually just get bored and move on? Nope. The real solution to the emu problem came not from military might, but from good old-fashioned, practical pest control. Turns out, things like bounty systems actually worked. In a 6-month period in 1934 alone, over 57,000 bounties were claimed for dead emus, and between 1945 and 1960, a staggering 284,700 emus were reportedly killed in Western Australia through this system. Take that! Machine guns! And perhaps the most effective solution. Fences. Long, sturdy, emu-proof fences. Plans were even drawn up for a massive 52,000 pounds emu-proof fence. These barriers kept the birds and other pests, like rabbits and dingoes, out of the precious farmlands. Plus, the government finally just gave the farmers the ammunition they'd asked for in the first place. Sometimes, the simplest solutions are the best. Of course, these fences sparked their own controversies, with some worrying they were endangering the emu species by blocking their natural migrations. But fear not, our feathered friends are thriving. By 1999, emus were formally protected again and are now classified as a least concerned species. They've even become a symbol of resilience in Australia. From vermin to victors, to symbol of resilience. What a journey! The Great Emu War stands as a hilariously bizarre, yet surprisingly insightful, chapter in Australian history. It's a cautionary tale about bureaucratic bunk, the limitations of human attempts to control nature, and the sheer unpredictability of wildlife. It reminds us that sometimes the best way to win a war against nature is to stop fighting it altogether and start understanding it. The war ended not with a bang, but with a barrier, a much more effective strategy. Its bizarre nature has cemented its place in popular culture, inspiring everything from musicals and films to video games. There's even an emu gargoyle at the Australian War Memorial, a subtle nod to its peculiar but undeniable place in our national story. So, the next time you see an emu, give it a respectful nod. It's not just a large, flightless bird. It's a veteran of a war it decisively won, the Great Emu War. A truly wild ride through Australian history. It taught us that you can't just throw machine guns at every problem, especially when that problem has wings. Or, rather, no wings, but an incredible ability to run circles around your best efforts. It's a story of human ingenuity meeting natural resilience, and nature, quite frankly, kicking human butt. It's a reminder that sometimes the most profound wisdom lies not in conquering, but in coexisting. And that, my friends, is the bizarre, true, and wonderfully funny story of how Australia lost a war to birds. What do you think? Were the emus just lucky, or were they secretly masters? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe, like, hype. If you think this is hilarious, share it with your friends and family. Stay curious. Curious Clan.